like I was saying before, the style guide contains different things: a tone of voice, a masthead, flat plan with the guidelines for the flow, guidelines for the grids, guidelines for the typographic concept, and guidelines for image type, and finally the finishing for print. So that's just roughly what a style guide contains, and I'll go through those items in this style guide manual right here called the Style Guide Content. And notice that it says up here slideshow by Anno for classes with PTB. That was last year where we were teaching together, me and Peter. But Peter will not be here, but you can just, have him in your mind while listening to this uh, without it being disturbing. Um, so yeah, what's today about? Style guides. That's what's going to happen. So let's go through this. And I think that I'll actually go into full screen because I'm a full screen kind of guy. And we'll just see if we can move this a bit out to there. Yes. So let's go into the style guide. Why do we use or make a style guide? Well, it's to have rules, requirement, guidelines, and so on to make sure that your design speaks one common language and that there's a connection in the style, identity, and theme. Well, why? Because the sender is then easily recognized. We recognize who it is. That's always nice. The design team understands how to make design and communication by having the style guide. So that's also important. That's like as important as having a design guide, that the company knows how to communicate for a company. Well, then also it's important for the design team to know how to communicate for a magazine. Also, another why is that the guide helps define the design parameters, so we know how to design the magazine. Yes, okay. So this is a fictitious magazine where there's rules inside as well. So, and like I said, I drew this inside of Procreate using my iPad and my iPad, my pencil, iPad. I can't even remember the name. But my digital pencil, and I actually drew this on this guide. So it's not looking it's very fast that I drew this, and it's just so we have an example of what the content could be. So it doesn't need to look nice in order for us to understand the message of what's located in the different chapters. Okay, so there will be some kind of there'll be a front page, and there'll be perhaps a title page containing information about who made this manual, perhaps when it was released and so on. So just a lot of not vital information, but just some publication info. So this is often not located in the style guide. The title page is not essential to have inside of your style guide. But if you did include it, it would have your names written on it. So the different students who made the style guide would have their names written on it, so we can know who actually made this. Okay, so the first thing that is absolutely with certainty inside of a style guide is a table of contents, so you know what you're going to look at throughout the following pages. And these are the items also that we talked about before will typically be located inside of a style guide, the ones noted on this table of content. So there will be a table of content, and next off, it will be typical that there's a design voice describing how the magazine speaks to its audience in verbals and visuals. Is it a formal language? Is it a very humorous language? Is it, a very nerdy language, and so on? So that will be described in the tone of voice how we actually communicate to our audience. Next off will be a description of the flow inside of the magazine. You know, is it a fast flow? Is it more like a slow flow? Is it, you know, is there some specifics for how the flow of the magazine will be? And if I'm talking fast flow, it could be short articles with, you know, small columns of text. So you read the article fast and then move on to the next article faster. Or is it more like very documentary-ish articles where you have a lot of text in each column and the article is very thorough at describing the subject? Well, that makes a slow flow, you know, because you're focusing on being serious and getting in depth with the content. And, you know, such differences in articles will determine how fast the reading pace is of this magazine. And that's also part of describing the flow. Is there are a lot of pictures containing mainly adverts and pictures. So you read these pages fast because it's pictures, and, you know, we skim pictures very fast and identify content on them very fast and analyze them very fast, you know, compared to actually reading text. So what is the flow in the magazine? Try to describe how the flow of the magazine is, because there, if you look through different magazines, especially tabloid magazines, you'll notice that there is some system to where the different articles are located, and also there's most likely a why to where they're located, because it makes more sense to have, let's say, a letter box where someone is answering the audience with their monthly questions. Makes more sense to have that in the end, because this perhaps only concerns a few of the audience, and likewise for the horoscope to be located by the end, whereas some of the most you know, impressive articles might be located at the start of the magazine, or they might be located in the center of the magazine. So, you know, but just try to describe how the different articles and content of the magazine is put inside of the magazine, so you have an idea of how the flow is inside of the magazine. And you can use colors to describe this. Is most likely you will make a flat plan as well to describe it. So in this case, it's a magazine containing 44 pages. That's a small magazine, but that's perhaps roughly what you will produce. And it doesn't have to be much more precise than this. You can see here it's just a sketch, and a sketch is fine as long as I understand what the sketch is trying to tell me. And in this case, I've tried to, you know, communicate that the areas marked with orange defines the most attractive content. Of course, you would be more specific. You could say that this is lifestyle articles, for example. And the ones noted with rose color, kind of bright red color, is for advertising space. That's commercials. So you could also use some kind of model in the Danish kunsten at lave blade. That's an article I put out on your lesson plan, and on the start page, there's a Danish text also describing what we know as the M or W curve, which is the tension curve of, you know, the speed the magazine has in building up and slowing down. So you can use that for inspiration, that Danish text. If you an international student, you can use Google Translate if you want. But I want to point out that it's purely for inspiration. You don't have to read that Danish article, but that will just perhaps give you an idea of how authors refer to this we know as flow inside of magazines. Yeah, so having a flat plan describing the flow is a good idea when building up a magazine, so other creators later on, if they're supposed to make another edition, that they know where the different articles are located based on purpose inside of the magazine. Yes, okay, the next thing we'll have inside of our magazine is our masthead. That's the magazine's logo, you know, what you see on the front page of a magazine, often next to a person or an object, what you see at the top of a magazine. In this case, I call this magazine Design Tech Magazine. Yeah, I'm very creative at finding names. And it will, like when creating a design guide, describe how the logo, you know, the masthead is going to look, but also if it's possible to have it made in different colors, in different, you know, information about which sizes are allowed, if it can be used in different variants and so on. So just a lot of information about how this masthead is going to be used in your magazine. Well, not just actually on the cover, but it could also be rules for using it on headers inside of the magazine. So let's say inside of the content of the magazine, you might have a header that actually contains the masthead of the magazine. Let's say in the top right corner, we have the masthead of the magazine in a tiny version, a small version located at the top right of the page. Well, then also describe how that will be used inside of the magazine. So the masthead does not necessarily only describe how it's used on the cover. It could also have descriptions of how it is used inside of the magazine. And you know, it's a good idea to have examples. Examples always help to clarify how we use the different things inside of our style guide and put them in practice. So here you can see I show one example, two examples, and perhaps some other examples. And you just do that by trying to put in practice. If you want to show this in your style guide, you can just take a lot of different pictures of a lot of different people or objects and try putting, you know, your masthead either on top of these pictures or try to put them behind a person's head. You know, how much is it allowed that we cannot be, that's not visible off the logo if placed behind something? And, you know, just figure out how are we allowed to use this masthead of the magazine. And perhaps also how we're not supposed to use it. Like you see here, I made some examples of how we're not supposed to use it. In this case, I've made my design guide so all the, you know, examples and visuals about how we're supposed to use that is located on the right. Whereas on the left, there's just a lot of, you know, text, additional text describing what's going on over here on the visuals. So good idea to not just put pictures in showing what's right and what's wrong, but also have additional text describing what's actually going on these pictures over here. So we know how we're supposed to use these rules. Okay, aside from having rules for the masthead on how we're supposed to use the masthead, you should also have rules for which colors the magazine uses. Like a design guide and a corporate identity, a magazine also has some specific colors that it uses, some key colors that it will always use, and so we attach identity to those colors. So let's say it's, in this case, it's black, green, and I don't know, brown, red. And these are the magazine's identity colors. So these, of course, will have some requirements and rules for how they're supposed to be used inside of the magazine. Perhaps this color, one of these colors is always used like some kind of background color. Well, if it was this dark red as that background color, well, then perhaps it should have white text because it's a very dark red. and dark red versus black text becomes, you know, almost impossible to read. So rules for how colors are used, but also if it's possible to use gradients of that color. So like in a design guide, you would typically also state, is it possible to use this green in a brighter version? Is it possible to use this red in a brighter version? Is it possible to use this black in a brighter version? So also descriptions of if there's variants of these colors that can be used, and perhaps even color harmonies. If there's some a set of colors that you prefer being used together with each other. Notice that also in the section called layout, perhaps this part about how to use colors might also be described, because let's say you have some lifestyle articles where one of these lifestyle articles each month will always be green because it's the, you know, the lifestyle magazine about, I don't know, health or, you know, being one with nature. So perhaps some specific layouts in your magazine also has specific colors that they always use. That would perhaps be more logical to explain in the section, the chapter about the layout. But it's up to you. You could also have it as examples as part of the colors chapter. And this colors chapter right here is very short. It could normally easily be several pages. So it doesn't have to be like I show right here, that the masthead is 2 pages, the colors is 1 page, and so on. No, it can easily, the masthead could be 20 pages. It could also be 2 pages. Likewise, colors could easily be 5 pages instead of just 1 page. Just make sure that you're, you know, telling everything that is possible about the guidelines for how you're supposed to use this. Because if there's something you forget to explain in your style guide, that means the designer will have to make the choice him or herself when designing the magazine. And that means if you're 5 different designers designing different articles for the magazine, you'll get 5 different versions, you know, 5 different identities for these different articles, which is not necessarily the same identity which is preferred for the magazine to have. So it's very important that you state all of these guidelines before actually making the magazine, so you know that everyone in the team, all designers in the team, are following the same rules and just make it the same way. Yes, okay. So there's also a section about layout. That's the guidelines for grids and so on. Here you could have, you know, visuals showing how a master page is constructed for the different articles. You could have it show how the grids are made. How will a grid look for my lifestyle articles? How will it look for my gadgets articles, and so on? Am I using different grids in my magazine? It's very common that you use more than one grid in your magazine depending on what the content is. So you'll have these different grids on different master pages perhaps. Also describe how you're using your margins, how you're using your footer, how you're using your header, what it's supposed to contain, these different areas and so on. And so is there automatic page numbering, blah, blah, blah. And here I'm trying to show an example of the layout using this. Let's say this is a master page that I've constructed here, and it shows that this is how, when using this master page, it might look if it turns into an article. I don't know, an illustration of someone puking. Yeah. So this actually looks more like this would be the example of how this layout would look if put into praxis. And yeah, so examples are always great. So this is actually where all of the layout is explained. Okay, so you also have a typography chapter where you explain the different fonts you're using, and you write which size they're supposed to be in the magazine. This is a magazine that's for print, so this will always month by month be the same sizes. Whereas if this was something that was different media each month, of course it would be hard to pinpoint the size. But when it's a magazine, you expect that this format will be the same, the dimensions will be the same month after month after month. So one thing you do know and can write down is actually the size of the font. So here you'll note down all the fonts you're using, which context they're being used in, so you can put it in writing, and also show examples of how this font is being used in, an example of a fictitious article that you create, for example. So good idea with examples, like I said before. And yeah, you can get inspiration by looking in design guides as well. The most closely related to a style guide is a design guide. So for references on how to make good examples and so on, you could go in and check any professional design guide to get an idea of how these different chapters should be made. A lot of these different chapters. Yeah, and also different types of fonts will be used for different purposes. And Michael was telling you about that Friday, about what a cover of a magazine contains and what the content of a magazine is. And he was telling you the expressions we use for bylines, cover lines, and so on. And so you can just go back in those files and check what is the different parts of typography called inside of a magazine, and use those as, to describe where they'll go inside of a magazine when making this typography chapter. And also, again, good idea to show examples of how it's being used inside of a layout. So we know exactly how to use text when making articles. Over here it also says examples of what the text could be named according to what its purpose is: body text, cover lines, bylines, quotes, whatnot. Last but not least, well, actually it's the second last chapter, is the image section. Which image style are you going to be using? Which image type is it going to be? Is it going to be different types of images for different type of articles? For example, what kind of images will be used for the sports section? What type of images will be used for the coffee section if your magazine contains that kind of articles, and so on. So simply just describing the style of the images, and which filters is being used, how they're cropped, if it's zoomed in a specific way on these pictures, and not just for the entire magazine, perhaps also for specific sections inside of the magazine. And also if there are some notes to pictures, things that they may never contain, that they're not allowed to contain. For example, note, it says here, no nudity, and remember ethnic diversity. So there also always have to be, pictures of, let's say, Caucasian, Asian, black, and so on, people, if it's people on the pictures. So we are being political correct. If that was the, tone of voice for this magazine, then also remember to write that down in the image section. So when figuring out the images for the magazine, people are making the right choices. And this is purely related to which kind of magazine it is. So there will be different rules depending on which kind of magazine that you're creating. Like I said earlier, for example, if it's a gadget magazine, there will most likely be a lot of close-ups. So perhaps there are some cropping rules for how pictures are supposed to be, how to look, and perhaps also some rules for retouching. For example, fashion magazines have a tendency of overly retouching the pictures. So are there rules for that inside of your magazine as well? When it comes to interior decoration magazines, they will often have very bright pictures. So all of these rules needs to be located in this section so we know how pictures are supposed to be used in our magazine, and so we get it right. So 3 different people can be working on this magazine at the same time, and still it will look like it's the same person who made it all, even though it was 3 different people making it, because they have the same rule book to go by, because they have the same style guide to follow. And also, aside from images, it could also be rules for graphic in general. How is there some graphic we always use on our different articles and so on? So it is not necessarily just image style, it could also be graphics and how graphic is being used inside of the magazine. Also, if there are super graphics, like when making a visual identity, well, then where it's supposed to be used, is there some kind of patterns, some kind of lines that you always use, some gradients that you use again and again, and so on, and what will the rules be for this? In this case, is there some kind of subsidiary logo? In this case, it's an abbreviation of Design Tech magazine, and if there is, how will we use it? In this case, it's supposed to be located somewhere in the header on this example. So just get in general rules for other graphics, aside from also rules for images, also rules for graphics in general. Last but not least, the print related stuff. Which format is it, the dimension, which paper type is it, both for the cover but also for the inside pages. Which binding will we be using? Is it glue back? Is it glued to a spine, or is it stapled? That's very rare that you find a magazine that's stapled unless it's very short. And is there some kind of finishing? For example, is some glimmer or some golden varnish that's put on top of the masthead on the magazine? I don't know if you noticed this, but a lot of magazines, the masthead stands out from the surface. You can actually touch the surface of the magazine, and you'll notice that the masthead actually is slightly elevated from the magazine cover because it has a different finishing. There's been used a special lacquer effect or something like that to make it stand out from the rest of the cover. So there could be some kind of finishing criteria, but on this page is where you describe how it will be printed correctly on the correct type of paper and with the correct type of finishing. So this will help also, if shared with the production crew, this will help them make sure that it's printed on the right paper and with the right paper for the cover and with the right finishing. And that is what a style guide typically will contain. And this style guide will, in the end, help you describe how your magazine is supposed to look. And I'll just show an example here of another group which made one, and I hope they're okay with that. This is from the marketing class, and they made one for their magazine. And this is Sundhedsstyrelsen, the Danish health government or health department. And you see they have a table of content. You see they have a tone of voice. You see they have the flow, where it describes how the magazine is built up. You have the masthead showing how the masthead is supposed to look, the colors, and which gradients the tints of the colors are allowed to be used as well. Something about the layout of the magazine, how the articles are supposed to look up layout wise, more details on that subject, and also something about the page numbering and the footer and the header, and even more about the layout. So something about the typography and something about the image guidelines for style and filters and so on, and more about that. And a separate, this is actually a separate section that's quite similar to the one I described about extra graphic used inside of the magazine. But here it doesn't describe where these are used, but still it describes some of the extra graphic that is used inside of the magazine. And last but not least, the part about how you make sure that it's printed in the right paper and which type of binding it is, and finishing. So this is just an example of what one of the other groups made, just so you can, you know, set this in context. This this style guide example right here. And that's what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to make a finished style guide describing all of these things. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to stop the video